What's up, everybody? My name is Richard Terrell. I go by Kirby Kid, and you are watching DO Live. This is a daily stream show in which we talk about game design. The conversations usually start on the Discord channel, and then I just pick a random topic or pick all the topics and discuss them in a live format. Here is where you can kind of talk to me live, jump in the chat, jump in the Discord voice channel, and we can tackle a lot of topics much easier this way with video and hands-on examples. So this is why I like to do this. And I know I said I would stop doing the whole puzzle thing, but I had a few more lingering questions I had to check out, and I've been researching games like Puyo, Tetris, and Dr. Mario just a little bit more. Just building my understanding about how these games work and finding the language to talk about it with other people. And that kind of brings us to the point of the start of this stream chat anyway. So, I saw something, and I'm gonna play the audio for you just so you can hear exactly what I heard. In fact, I'll pause this. I'll click this, and here's the video. So, one thing that a lot of people love, go figure, is they like the games they like to play. And one thing that they like to do about it in order to share what they love is they talk about it. I think one thing that I've been saying for a long time is people talk about the things they care about, right? For the most part, if you like food, you're going to tell someone about it. If you like a movie, you're going to tell somebody about it or talk about it or whatever. And just sharing is caring. So in the same fashion, we can figure out what people like about games by hearing how they talk about it. But games, just like everything else, are tricky. There are a lot of complexities and specifics and a lot of things that are much easier to explain if somebody else has had the same experience, but if they have the same experience, we wouldn't need to explain it. So it's kind of like you can never get on the good side of that little coin there with the two problems on the same face. So what we're going to do is listen to how this particular enthusiastic fan of Puyo Tetris describes playing Puyo. So I'm just going to click it here. It's about 2 minutes, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it nice and crisp.
Puyo often gets compared to fighting games. Sure, there's techniques named after fighting game moves and characters, but the similarities run much deeper on a fundamental level than you might expect. Let's learn why, using analogies with fighting game concepts. Chains are how you attack in Puyo. You can think of the amount of time it takes to build and set off a chain like frame data, while the length of the chain determines the amount of damage your attack does. Small chains are weak but have fast startup, while huge chains take a long time to build but lead to big damage if they connect. Puyo Puyo also lets you neutralize incoming garbage by setting off a chain of your own. It basically gives you the ability to block. Don't expect to get anywhere by just mashing attack all day. You have to learn to down back at the right moment as well. Cause not only can you neutralize garbage with your own chain, but you can counter attack if your own chain is bigger. The larger the chain, the more recovery frames it has, and particularly unsafe attacks have fatal consequences if countered. The end result is shockingly similar to the neutral game and footsies in fighting games. You want to send out small pokes to pressure your opponent, either by baiting them into making unsafe moves which you then punish, or by getting a hit confirmed that leads into even bigger damage. Most importantly, you're playing against another human player, and not just a CPU that churns out garbage. To win at the highest competitive levels of Puyo, you've got to read your opponent's board, learn their habits, and take advantage of their weaknesses, all while protecting your own builds as they try to do the same to you. These mind games are what make Puyo Puyo stand out amongst other puzzle fighters, and are the reason why it's been played competitively for over 25 years.
So that's the video. So here we go. We're gonna talk about this analogy. Yo. Welcome to the chat. But before I dive into the specific language in this video, I'm gonna YouTube Google one thing. YouTube. Here we go. I'm gonna type in Splatoon is a MOBA. Splatoon is secretly a MOBA. This is a video that came out on what I used to think was a respected gaming outlet, but then they released this video. I'm just kidding. But I'm just going to click it. We're going to listen to a bit of it, and then you can decide from there. We're going to have a conversation from there. So let me clickety-click. It's an advertisement. You can ignore that for now. It doesn't really matter. What is this advertising? Oh, wow. Wow. Moving on. Spoilers.
Hello, I've been playing Splatoon a bit recently, and it's a bit bonkers. Not that I should really have to tell you that. I mean, look at it.
Splatoon pits two teams of 4 squid human warrior things against one another, competing to see who can cover the map in the most ink before the clock runs out. It's a lot of fun, it's fast paced without being too frenetic, and the matches are pretty quick, so it's easy to tell yourself you're going to play just one more. Granted, some of it is a bit mid-90s CBBC, like the shops which don't open up for you until you hit level 4 because you aren't fresh enough, but overall there's a lot to like.
For a shooter, it's really different because, well, frankly, I don't think it's a shooter at all. See, Nintendo can talk it up as much as they like as a refreshing, fun new take on the shooting genre, but to me, it's a MOBA.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Splatoon? Like one of these? Stop huffing glue, Johnny. It's really not good for you, and quite clearly it's already loosening your grip on reality. Well, to that, I'd say no. Firstly, it's fun, and I don't even do it that often. And secondly, I genuinely think Splatoon is Nintendo's entry into the multiplayer online battle arena. I mean, everyone's having a crack at making a MOBA at the minute, even if they're bending over backwards to avoid using the word MOBA itself, so why not Nintendo?
Okay, so it's never going to have the same gameplay complexity as League of Legends or Dota 2 or Heart of the Storm.
Or Battleborn.
But here are a few reasons it plays more like a MOBA than anything else.
Firstly, Splatoon is big on establishing and exerting map control. In fact, it's the chief mechanic. Now, if you're playing a MOBA like Dota 2 and you're able to dominate your lane, you're off to a great start. Splatoon is the same experience. You need to get a convincing hold on your territory with ink, then enforce it strongly and consistently enough to let you go on offensive maneuvers and take more territory, the same way you'd push a tower or some racks in Dota. Yes, there are map control modes in a bunch of shooters like Battlefield and Call of Duty, but they just don't play the same as a traditional MOBA or Splatoon. They don't have the same push and pull momentum swings that eventually turn into one team completely flattening the other.
And because map control is such an important mechanic in Splatoon, your timing and positioning are also key.
Just like in a MOBA, you need to develop a sense for when a match is going a certain way so you can respond accordingly. You need to know when to push and when to fall back, when someone can be left to hold their own for a while, and when to move in because you smell a team fight brewing. It might seem like I'm reading a bit much into a game aimed at children that lets you turn into a squid hovercraft hybrid, but these are genuinely the tactical considerations opened up to you during the course of each match in Splatoon. And anyway, a squid that is also a human who knows how to use a gun is nothing compared to some of the heroes in Dota. I mean, look at Techies. Techies is genuinely 3 goblins running around the map with a cart full of bombs and nobody bats an eyelid.
Oh, okay, Valve, bomb-lobbing goblins. That makes sense. Really looking forward to the International.
Now, obviously Splatoon will never really be accepted as a MOBA for a number of reasons. Firstly, no voice or text chat. Number 2, it positions itself as a shooter. Number 3, you can't roam with the camera to see what others are up to like you can in a MOBA. And it's also on the Wii U, so frankly, good luck getting hardcore MOBA players to step away from their PCs and work on their tri-lane pushes in a game.
Man, this reasoning is so bad, I had to pause it. This is so bad, this guy makes no sense, and he's just one example of why video games are complicated, why it's hard to talk about video games, and why people who try the hardest seem to fail the hardest. This is pathetic, though. So we're going to back up a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of the things he said. Let's just go backwards. So the last thing he said was Splatoon won't be a MOBA, and then he starts listing reasons that have nothing to do with a genre definition. Right.
Really be accepted as a MOBA for a number of reasons. Firstly, no voice or text chat.
No voice or text chat? Who cares, right? I don't think there's a single genre of video game that is defined by a feature like that, like having text or voice chat or online lobbies or peer-to-peer or whatever. Like, that's all ancillary to what the core gameplay is doing and how it's designed. So dumb.
Number 2, it positions itself as a shooter.
So like, it's also marketed as a this, right? But that's probably because it is a shooter. But still, like, let me see if I can find a good example. I mean, I feel like for all the people who huff and puff about how genre labels are just marketing, well, that's dumb, because marketing is using the same tools that we use to communicate. It's called language. It's called trying to communicate. But beyond that, even they get it right? They know what game they're making. They know when you look at it and it says like action RPG for like whatever, Dark Souls, whatever, like, yeah, I mean, it's got those elements in it, and those are pretty prominent, so they label it as such. And they label Smash Brothers as a fighting game since the beginning, right? Because Sakurai knew he was making a fighting game. He studied fighting games, had experience with fighting games, and he made a fighting game. It's a game where his initial inspiration was, I want guys to fight. You're like, okay, then it's a fighting game. Of course, a ton of people get, you know, twisted and mixed up when they're like, it's not Street Fighter, it doesn't look like Street Fighter. Like, well, guess what? Street Fighter, if there is to be a genre, and if that genre is going to be not called Street Fighter likes, and then we can expand it to be include things that don't have Ryu and Chun-Li in it, right? So that's dumb.
Number 3, you can't roam with the camera to see what others are up to like you can in a MOBA.
So that's dumb too, right? So you might say that he's getting closer to actually talking about gamey things and game systems. Moving the camera to look at what other people are up to, and you can't do that with Splatoon, so that's why it's not a MOBA. Well, you do have a map, and you can hit X in Splatoon 2 or look down on your Wii U gamepad, and then you can see everything from a bird's eye view, right? So, and I mean, it's a map. You don't need to roam with your main TV screen if you've got that ability. And, you know, fidelity and concentration of information-wise are different, but in the general principle, you still got your map, so I didn't think this reason that he had here was well thought out.
It's also on the Wii U, so frankly...
Oh, it's on the Wii U, so hardcore players aren't going to come over from MOBAs to play. Like, who cares? You were trying to argue whether or not the game is a MOBA, and then you're saying, well, the PC players are going to come over, so it's not a MOBA. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Everything this guy says doesn't make any stupid sense. He's just rambling and acting dumb. So here's one thing I wanted to point out about this video, and then we're going to go back into the Puyo Tetris. Here, people fumble all the time when trying to make a comparison, and it really feels like they have zero experience with anything outside the thing they're trying to compare and the original thing they're trying to draw the comparison to, like the new thing versus the thing that had some more experience with. Can't believe how many people try to describe something in a game when it's so painfully obvious that that's what an entire branch of game or genre of game or history of games have been doing forever. Like when people try to tell you that in Dark Souls the combat is good because you have to think about timing. We've been thinking about timing in every single video game with live real-time gameplay, from Donkey Kong on the arcades to everything beyond that, including every platformer and every fighting game and every shoot-'em-up. You think about timing. It's called a real-time game, okay? So you don't have to tell me that you all of a sudden are now like, oh, I've never thought about timing before. It's great and all that you started to step into this whole world of gameplay styles and interactions by playing a game that you like, that, you know, just relatively modern. Cool, kudos, join the fold, welcome to the club. That's great. But like to take that experience and to turn around and be like, no other game has timing, you're like, are you serious? Just think about it for a second. I'm sure you've also played a game with timing, but the language that they use, there seems to be a huge disconnect with the language they use and the sense that they're trying to make. But I argue that they aren't making any sense in their head, and the language isn't failing them. They're actually using language very well to sort of get at what they're thinking. It's just that they're not thinking very clearly in the first place, so the language isn't failing them, they're failing the language.
Things against one another, competing to see who can cover the map in the most ink before the clock runs out.
So, and also, he's talking about Turf War. This game has the 3 other modes besides Turf War, and all those modes are considered the competitive modes, and Turf War is supposed to be like the casual, sort of easier to get into, easier to play mode. But, you know, that's kind of beside the point. You paint territory in all the modes in Splatoon. So
it's a lot of fun. It's fast-paced without being too frenetic, and the matches are a bit mid-90s CB enough, but I don't think it's a shooter at all. See, Nintendo can talk it up as much as they like as a refreshing... Now, I know what you're thinking. Splatoon? Like one of these? Stop huffing glue, John. Well, to that, I'd say I think Splatoon is Nintendo's entry into the multiplayer online battle arena.
So, another thing that people get tripped up on when talking about language and genres and just trying to actually be smart in general, right? They ineffectively break things down And that just sets them on the wrong path of thinking. Like when you're saying, oh, what's a role-playing game? And they're like, well, I'm playing a role, therefore this is a role-playing game. No, okay? Language isn't like an equation. Language isn't like computer scripting. Language can be very, very arbitrary. It can be very structured. It can be just very random, right? Like random catchphrases, and the fact that we say okay, but that was actually sort of like, what's the history? A misspelling and a guy poking fun at a misspelling of a sort of a phrase that they use in the printing world to say like no typographical errors or something like that. I don't know. There's a whole history there, but all that weird history really doesn't matter once you say the letters okay and you understand what it means. So we don't need to reverse engineer okay being like, well, it has an O and a K in it, therefore, like, no, you've missed it. There's a whole history there that is not going to be derivable from the end result, right? Same with genres. Some are very clear, like first-person shooter. You could do it with that, but others aren't, like role-playing game and MOBA. That's the latest sort of genre that we got to deal with. Multiplayer, online battle arenas. The other people tried to call it arts, which are action, real-time strategy games, arts. But the thing is, MOBA is kind of like a gamified version of an RPG, right? So that's where I think, so like, the common systems and trends and tropes of having 3 lanes and 5 people and all these champions, sure, those are the common elements that kind of exist in Dota and League of Legends and all that. And since those are some of the biggest MOBA examples, this seems to be like, this is how you have to define it. But like the Street Fighter example, there are common systems beneath that are more transferable to other IPs and other titles that would still create the similar or same kind of gameplay experience, just without necessarily going down the same stylistic paths, right? So multiplayer, lots of games are multiplayer. Online, lots of games are online. Battle just means conflict, and most of these games are about battling. We're not building like Minecraft buildings, we're not painting things, we're not doing anything like that. A lot of video games are directly confrontational, so you can call that a battle. And then arena, you're in a space. That's like one of the least descriptive genre names that we've had in a long time. So you don't worry about the actual label. You just go, I know what they're referring to. Let me see if I can think about a MOBA and extract its core principles. And a lot of people trip up on making that sort of jump because there's a disconnect.
Arena. I mean, everyone's having a crack at making a MOBA at the minute, even if they're bending over backwards to avoid using the word MOBA itself, so why not, Nintendo?
Okay, so it's never going to have the same gameplay complexity as League of Legends or Dota 2 or Heart of the Storm.
Or Battleborn.
But here are a few reasons it plays more like a MOBA than anything else.
Okay, so now he's going to look at how the game plays.
Firstly, Splatoon is big on establishing and exerting map control.
Guess what? In every competitive game that ever uses space, and like 99% of games use space, and if you have a competitive game where the players exist in the same space, they're always going to be fighting for position in that space, right? Like 99% of those games are going to be fighting for position in that space, and one way you fight for position is by blocking off zones, by closing doors and lanes, by threatening areas, like in Bomberman, by putting bombs and flames there. Like that is called, that's how you exert spatial control, because what you do either threatens something or has some direct interplay with their very existence, so they have to back up or whatever. You can say the same thing about sports, right? You defend in football, you create a formation and pass in soccer, you create a pick and roll in basketball, like all this stuff. This is just common to so many different games, and you exert control.
In fact, it's the chief mechanic.
It's not a mechanic, that's so dumb. But anyway, you exert control in all these games, including other first-person shooters like Halo. If you've paid attention to Halo, and back in the day in Halo 2, spawn camping, and Halo 3 spawn camping was kind of a problem, because when they can position themselves in the map in a way and kill you, the game tries to spawn you away from where the enemies are, and then if there's only so many places left to spawn, they have to spawn there, and then they know you're going to spawn there, then they kill you immediately, and just creates a very difficult situation to be in. But that's map control, right? That's controlling the space and positioning yourself. And you have a sniper in any first-person shooter, you exert control because you have a range advantage. And you're like, I am controlling everywhere that my sniper can see. That means the other people have to go around or figure out some other kind of way to deal with it. That's map control. People talk about map control all the time. I agree. The reason he talked about it was that DS emphasizes the timing aspects and had more punishment against it to where the point it was mandatory for them to give it extra attention. So yeah, like that's exactly why I think they were making those comments about Dark Souls in the first place. If you play RPGs your entire life, like Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, maybe Fallout, Oblivion, maybe what else? I had some others in mind. Oh, Diablo, games like that. A lot of those are turn-based, but some of them, when they actually introduce some sort of spatial real-time elements, those dynamics are greatly squashed and like de-emphasized. So I could see where if you came from that world and you're like, oh, I'm playing a game with space, controlling character, but you know, there's not much to it. And then you actually step into a game that actually is designed more like an action game than like those RPGs. It's a big difference. It's why we call them action games. It's why people like action games, and sometimes those same people hate RPGs, because there's a very big difference in experience right there. And that's probably what they're getting at. But all they need to say is, I'm used to playing this, and this game emphasizes more, and we'd be like, yes, end of conversation. Moving on. Yeah, just let me know if you have any other comments or questions. I'll read them.
Now, if you're playing a MOBA like Dota 2 and you're able to dominate your lane, you're off to a great start. Splatoon is the same experience. You need to get a convincing hold on your territory with ink, then enforce it strongly and consistently enough to let you go on offensive maneuvers and take more territory. The same.
I mean, that's just what I said before. It's just kind of describing basic competitive push and pull based on space, because they have to be based on space for the most part.
Where you'd push a tower or some racks in Dota. Yes, there are map control modes in a bunch of shooters like Battlefield and Call of Duty, but they just don't play the same as a traditional MOBA or Splatoon.
So that's dumb, too. Like, you're talking about turf war, and then you're ignoring the modes in Splatoon that are more like the other shooters, like King of the Hill. It's like Splat Zones, VIP, protected certain players like Rainmaker, and so on and so forth. Like, it's a shooter. So you don't gloss over it. And then, like, the fact that he says they don't play the same, when I really, really doubt he has experience playing those. Because it's the most easy comparison to, like I just did, make Splatoon comparisons to other pre-existing shooter genres and modes. It's super straightforward. So in his lack of experience and his sort of push to explain things in this MOBA framework, he's not actually doing a thorough comparison. He's just kind of making a YouTube video.
They don't have the same push and pull momentum swings that eventually turn into one team completely flattening the other.
So he thinks that in all these other shooters, there isn't a way to gain so much momentum that you can dominate the other team. What about getting the power weapons in Halo, and then you have the snipe and the rocket and the shotgun or whatever? How do they fight back after that? You just dominate. You push around the map and you bully them. Like, how about all these other games, right? There's swings all the time. Sometimes they're around weapons, sometimes around position. If you get to certain position first or have more players in those positions. Sometimes games are really tight, sometimes they're not. Even in Splatoon, right?
And because map control is such an important mechanic in Splatoon, your timing
It's not mechanics. Stop saying that.
and positioning are also key.
Just like in a MOBA, you need to develop.
Timing and positioning is key in a spatial game. So obviously, when a real-time game, where you are and when you are should be the primary sort of considerations, because those two systems in your game create the biggest dynamic for all the other systems to sort of support.
Develop a sense for when a match is going a certain way, so you can.
And then he just blah blah blahs. I'm tired of clicking through this, but he's just saying very general stuff, not making good comparisons, and using the wrong language to do it. And then he ends on a conclusion that isn't well researched or well founded. So this video made me mad. It pushed my buttons a long time ago, and I just thought I'd bring it up. But we're gonna go back to the puzzle video and see how he handles
Puyo
the comparison.
Puyo often gets compared to fighting games. Sure, there's techniques named after.
A lot of the techniques in Puyo Puyo are named after fighting game techniques,
moves
which
and
is pretty neat.
characters,
Sure you
but
chain and
similarities
stuff like
run
that.
much deeper on a fundamental level than you might expect. Let's learn why, using analogies with fighting game concepts.
here's another thing. One reason why I think this is kind of pathetic is it's cool to like video games, but when you're a critic or when you're trying to express yourself or explain something in a way that's more than the just like I like thing, it's important for you to realize that your experience and your perspective matters, and the whole purpose of explaining things is to sort of illuminate concepts, illuminate experiences, and invite other people into your same headspace or whatever, assuming that there's value there in the first place. A lot of times I feel like these gamer types are retreading such commonly known and commonly experienced ground because they are like anti-sports. Like, if you play any sport, right, tennis, baseball, soccer, basketball, like so many things that I've done in my youth, or even like martial arts or whatever, you'll realize that when the competition comes and the competition's at your level, a lot of that is going to have the same general experiential properties, right? There will be situations where you can do things that are highly risky and then give you a high reward, or low risk, low reward, medium risk, medium reward, or low risk, medium reward are some of the basic strategies that you build your whole game around. And then sometimes you go for the high risk. That's every single game. If you don't have the ability to make decisions with different amounts of risk reward, then you're not playing a head-to-head competitive game. You might just be playing like bowling. Even darts has some influence on the moves that the previous opponent does to what you're going to do next. So like, watch a sport, play a sport, and just understand that this feeling of not being able to easily gain an advantage is because the sport, you're like directly head to head with an opponent that has the same advantages that you do, and you're going to have the same type of experience no matter what.
Chains are how you attack in Puyo. You can think of the amount of time it takes to build and set off a chain like frame data.
So you can think about the time it takes to do something like frame data, which is a measure of time. Like, that's not much of a statement. Like, this is kind of where people, again, are using language, but it's not the language that's failing them, they're failing the language. You could just say this game has timing elements, where some things take more time to do than others. But you don't have to think of it like frame data, because it's just timing, right? It's kind of like that Dark Souls thing again. Like, just say this game's a real-time game, and then it's kind of assumed that the timing element is important.
While the length of the chain determines the amount of damage your attack does. Small chains are weak, but have fast startup, while huge chains take a long time to build, but lead to big damage if they connect.
I mean, that's a general neat comparison to fighting games, but that's like, I don't know what game isn't like that, right? What game has it to where your most damaging things are super quick, and then it takes you really long to get low damage things? That just, the reason why that isn't the case is because that flies in the face of the general way that we evaluate risk reward, because the longer something takes, it's easier for somebody to react to, it's easier for them to recognize and plan against and whatever, and the shorter something takes, the harder it is for them. So if it's harder to do something, or harder for somebody to defend, then you give them like a low reward. But if you take all that risk in setting it up, then you deserve a high reward, and that's generally how real-time games are balanced across the board. So you really don't need to make this comparison to say like this game has risk reward and alternate things you can do, some that are more risky and some that offer more reward. That's a given. It should be a given.
Puyo Puyo also lets you neutralize incoming garbage by setting off a chain of your own. It basically gives you the ability to block.
So I thought he was going to say, when you block somebody else's garbage, it's essentially like throwing a fireball into a fireball, right? You're using your offense to directly clash against their offense. But then he generalizes it even further and just says the ability to block. What game doesn't have defense, right? And that's kind of saying the same thing I just said before. If you have a lot of high risk, high reward things, medium risk, medium reward, and low risk, low reward, then a lot of times playing defense is taking the low risk, maybe medium reward or low risk, low reward options, and doing that a lot so you can sort of get back in the game or whatever. So like a lot of times that's what defense is. It's not not just like throwing out moves and trying to style on your opponent and doing the flashiest risky stuff. It's doing the conservative stuff. It's defense.
Expect to get anywhere by just mashing attack all day. You have to learn to down back at the right moment as well. Because not only can you neutralize garbage with your own chain, but you can counterattack if your own chain is bigger. The larger the chain, the more recovery frames it has, and particularly unsafe attacks have fatal consequences if countered. The end result is shockingly similar to the neutral game in footsies and fighting games.
This is what I was talking about before. What he calls the neutral, you should feel something to that effect in every sort of head-to-head competitive game you play, right? You should feel that both sides are pushing sort of all their advantages to the max, and you're really just on the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of trying to gain little advantages so you can build that together and kind of start the snowball rolling, right? That's like why competition is hard.
You want to send out small pokes to pressure your opponent, either by baiting them into making unsafe moves, which you then punish, or by getting a hit confirmed that leads into even bigger damage.
So I don't think, like I know with Puyo, you're supposed to watch your opponent's screen and like adjust your strategies accordingly, but I don't think there's situations where you bait them. Like you can try to send little quick chains to send quick garbage over to their side to sort of throw a small wrench into their mix, and you can also yeah, you can do that, but that's not a bait. That's like a more like the small jab that he was talking about, or like a tiny distraction, right? And his analogy is kind of falling apart here.
Most importantly, you're playing against another human player, and not just a CPU that churns out garbage. To win at the highest competitive levels of Puyo, you've got to read your opponent's board, learn their habits, and take advantage of their weaknesses.
So when he says read their boards, he is literally talking about looking at their screen, not necessarily the Yomi reading from fighting games where you are predicting what they're going to do in a situation, because this game has no direct interplay like that. This is an example of a game that's not in shared space. The two columns that you can clearly see are separate, and they send trash to each other that's also sort of like just an interpretation of the combo strength that they have, and it rains it down for you automatically. So you're not even aiming this stuff on their side, you're just letting the computer do its thing. So yeah, like the analogy and the metaphor breaks down.
All while protecting your own builds as they try to do the same to you. These mind games are what make Puyo Puyo stand out amongst other puzzle fighters.
So yeah, and then he just generalizes mind games. Like, I watched the entire top 8 of Puyo Puyo Tetris from EVO 2017, and nobody at any point said, what a nice read, or what a great mix-up. It's because they don't exist. You're so separate, and you can only respond in so many limited ways in your tiny little column world that it doesn't exist. It's very clear that this is not like a fighting game.
And are the reasons
it's competitive, and that's pretty much the only similarity.
And why it's been played competitively for over 25 years.
But hey, you be the judge. So yes, they have 2 separate boards, but their available options are kind of random, comparing the fighting games where they have all their move options. I mean, yeah, like the more you try to compare it to a fighting game, the more you're going to have trouble, because there's just not much of a comparison to make. Right? It's just really not. I think, oh, here's another one. I'm going to find another one that kind of, where's my Splatoon video? Right here? There we go. Pause. Somebody, let's see. Another one that the fans have sort of run wild with their very inaccurate language is talking about Catherine as if it's a fighting game. And this is, again, another competitive puzzle game, and I think so. This is a friend. I used to go to Smash tournaments with this guy. His name's Gulo too. He speedruns.
Metroid Prime
He streams speedruns all the time, and he was at Summer Games Done Quick. I got to watch him live, so that was pretty cool. But he plays Catherine, and he did a neat little, like, I'm playing 2 controllers with one hand kind of a thing. You see that pink controller there and his arcade stick. He's doing it at the same time. But he's the one that commonly describes Catherine as being a fighting game. I think he does it in the stream, if not him.
Even, 3 or 4 blocks above me. So
He might not do it here because he's playing a solo. Well, let's try to get lucky.
if I start losing sides of the tower, so you see it, you hear the sound effect of the stage.
Little dumb guy question here. What actually determines when you move up a level?
And it lives a bomb.
We're not getting lucky.
I will never talk again.
And are absolutely hellish. So, yes, this is going to be very fun.
So, oftentimes they describe this game as being like a fighting game because you have mix-ups and you have option selects, which are an advanced a competitive concept that's often found in fighting games or exploited in fighting games, and it has other things like that, right? I'm like, that doesn't make it a fighting game. It's so dumb. You know what game has mix-ups? Just about every competitive game where that you're existing in the same space or you're head-to-head ever, right? A mix-up, as I defined it, is playing in a way to influence your opponent to make a mistake. And you can define that mistake however you want, like wasting ammo, doing a shoryuken into your block, whatever, and you try to influence them to do that so then you can punish afterwards. But just saying a game has punishes, that should be like every competitive game that's head-to-head. Like, you can't punish in bowling because there's no direct interplay. But you can punish in just about everything else, right? Stealing the ball in basketball, you go down the other end and dunk it. Like, turnovers happen all the time, swings happen all the time. This is common parlance. Is that the right word? I don't want to look it up. But likewise, Catherine, just because you have some techniques and just because people are playing competitively and just because you're pushing the meta does not make you any more of a fighting game than Splatoon is to a MOBA or Puyo is to a fighting game, right? So that's just a little thing about language, and some of the other things that I was researching today falls more along the lines of just examining more Dr. Mario, examining some Tetris Attack, and examining the Puyo Tetris Grand Finals. I think labeling Street Fighter 2 as a base for a fighting game comparison is limiting for constructive conversation. Sure, everyone's got to start somewhere, so I really don't blame people for doing that. But then, if people are really serious about trying to communicate clearly, they would need to either be able to define things very clearly or break things down. And if they're not able to do either of those things, then it doesn't really matter where they start. They're just not gonna get much communicated. So yeah, some of the questions in the DL chat was talking about how Dr. Mario might be addressed, and some of my issues with Dr. Mario included not having enough control and the in-game getting kind of messy because of the pieces. You can't deal with some of the color combinations they give you, and you're making trash columns, and a lot of the gameplay just seems to be playing what's given to you directly, right? But after watching some of this high-level play, the game is more strict than many other puzzle games. Puyo kind of challenges you to start making chains immediately, which is kind of makes it a higher skill ceiling or a higher learning curve to get in. Tetris is super straightforward, and high-level Tetris is just a matter of smart piece placement and getting those longs down there to get the biggest possible Tetris. And Tetris is still like super deep and super challenging, but Tetris communicates that core much clearer and faster than games like Puyo. Tetris Attack is a simple matchmaking game with, I'll show you here, a flat surface to work on, and you can manipulate these pieces.
Yeah,
and it's just pretty clear that when you just slide pieces around, it's like sliding around children's blocks, right? And you make matches of 3 or more, and you try to catch the chains. Catching the chains due to gravity is like the cool thing, but it's just something that happens naturally and something you can understand relatively naturally too. But Dr. Mario has a lot more quirks in its space than this. And I feel like with Dr. Mario, where is it? Having to destroy viruses.
You never know. What's
kind of puts this additional sort of condition into the basic gameplay. Having to make 4 chains is a little harder than making 3 chains. Having 3 colors would be easier to make. It seems like it would be easier to make color matches in a 3-color game than like a 4, 5, 6-color game. But then your inability to manipulate them once they land makes it harder to sort of squeeze things in certain spaces sometimes. So for all those reasons, like Puyo, you have to play Dr. Mario well, you either have to have that experience and forethought, or you will struggle because those little garbage, ineffective, suboptimal decisions you've made are going to add up pretty quickly, and there's really no control that they give you to sort of neutralize that, right? The mistakes you make pretty much ripple forward, and there's not a lot you can do about it. And they even describe high-level play like this, right? Like sometimes you just get unlucky. Sometimes if you have all blue and red viruses at the top and they give you a yellow pill at the beginning, you just have to start dealing with that garbage. And it's not as elegant as Tetris, where every piece can be put into some kind of really meaningful configuration pretty quickly. It's not as flexible as Tetris Attack, where you just manipulate the board whenever you need to and just like shuffle everything around and push up more content from below if you want to increase the challenge. This is much more sort of like straightforward. And the chaining in this game is much less complex than Puyo. If you have a piece half hanging off the edge like that, I'll show you whiteboard. Right here, this piece is hanging half off the edge. In Puyo, the red part would have fallen down automatically, but this game has weird like hanging indents and suspensions like that make it just a little bit more complicated in some ways. So that gives Dr. Mario its unique gameplay, but it also has these weird negative, quirky like effects that travel with it, and addressing that is such an interesting conversation, right? So you saw me stream Jelly Bomber, which is a Dr. Mario-like game from Dino Farms, and they're trying to reduce the randomness and increase the complexity by having characters, and characters have active and passive abilities, and you have a super meter, like stuff like that. But I don't know if they have an opinion or are addressing some of the core issues that we're seeing here with Dr. Mario. So may I ask on which point you would prefer to start your conversations? So what I'm talking, that's a good question. Let me see if I have an article here that explains that perfectly. That's critical gaming. So I wrote an article, I think it's called Critical Methods and Standards. Let's see. Yeah. And here, I talk about my approach to talking about games and breaking down games and understanding games, and my general approach to addressing language issues, right? And it's just a long article about how I go about doing that. It says all of my writing comes from my thoughts and experiences. Over the years, I worked to develop both the language and the conceptual framework to understand game design. Part of my standard involves listening, and really listening and remembering what other people say, reserving the time to take what others have to say to heart, and then I mull over opinions and comments, and I try to synthesize everything into sort of a happy medium or the best fit. So when I talk about things and there seems to be a language issue, I just try to get people to take it one step underneath that and be like, if you're debating whether mechanic means this or that, then use a simpler description instead of the word, and just focus on that description, or focus on the aspects that you find interesting, focus on the common elements, and then we can just see what happens after that. Oftentimes people kind of lose steam or lose focus because if they're not used to thinking in a structured way, that they will get a headache or something. I'm not sure how they feel, but people tend to not want to put up with that kind of structure when they're communicating, and that's kind of a telltale sign that they wouldn't have been able to handle a conversation any other way anyway, right? When you have the foundation, when you have the base underneath you, you have confidence, you have clarity, you have stamina. If you don't, you just have complaints, you have resistance, you have irritated comments, and that's just how it goes. So yeah, for more about my method for approaching game design and language, I'll link this article. I wrote it, 6 years ago. It's been so long. People have no idea how long I've been doing this stuff, even though they probably do. Or they just check my blog out. But I've been doing this for a long time, and writing a lot, and thinking a lot, and playing a lot of games, and then listening to a lot of people, and then doing a lot of research. that is all. Any other comments about puzzle games, Dr. Mario? I will say I've warmed up to Dr. Mario, even though I've been kind of dissing it. After looking at high-level play and playing a little bit of a Dr. Mario-like and thinking about it and observing it and then comparing it to these other games, I'm like, you know what, it does do something pretty complex, pretty elegantly, right? 3 colors. It's the only puzzle game I know of that gives you like a random field like this. So in Tetris DS, I think there's a challenge mode where they start you up with garbage from the bottom, and the garbage could have like, you know, a different array of holes or whatever, just kind of like this. But most Tetris is played from a clean slate. So this is one of the few puzzle games I feel like where they give you a textured opening, right? And I think that's kind of interesting in and of itself. If you just listen to a little bit of this commentary, you'll see that these players have... What? Yeah, these players have their own style. They have their own unique way of decision making. They have their own way of getting out of trouble and their own way of seeing trouble coming. And even though I don't have the eyes to see all of it, I know playing wise it's difficult to achieve that level of skill. So for a game with like very few moving parts and no multiple pieces like Tetraminos with their shapes and no crazy gravity with falling chains, it does achieve a kind of a pretty effective end experience, I think. I think that's it for our little puzzle follow-up. I might play a little Jelly No puzzle just to see what's up, but I probably should just move on. I got Iconoclast and Cuphead and more action-style games to play this week. So hey, maybe this stream was actually short and I can get out before it gets too long. So thanks for joining us on the stream. If you have any questions or you want to be a part of it next time, we stream every day, so you're bound to catch one about 10 p.m. 10:30 p.m. on weekdays, and on the weekend it could happen at any time. So until next time, guys, see you later.